Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story. Call the cops. That black kid is stealing from our mailboxes. He's casing the neighborhood. I saw him. Margaret Williams' piercing voice shattered the calm of Riverside Estates, echoing down the pristine street lined with million-dollar homes. "Somebody stop him before he breaks into a house," she screamed, waving her phone wildly, already recording. Her words sharp enough to cut through the afternoon air. Neighbors froze, curtains shifted, doors cracked open. Within seconds, whispers spread along Riverside Drive like wildfire. One small boy's quiet afternoon had turned into chaos. Marcus Johnson was only 8 years old, a bright, curious black boy with big dreams and an even bigger heart. That afternoon, he wandered near the community mailbox carrying his tiny silver telescope, a gift from his late father, an Air Force pilot who died 2 years ago. To Marcus, it wasn't just a telescope. It was his magic eye, his way of chasing the stars his father once taught him about. But to Margaret Williams, their 48-year-old neighbor across the street, Marcus wasn't a little boy exploring. He was a threat. Margaret had been watching from her second-floor window for weeks. Her life consumed by bitterness since a painful divorce 8 months earlier. Nights spent scrolling through online forums filled her mind with fear-driven stories about suspicious activity in wealthy neighborhoods. Every sound outside her window became a warning sign. Every unfamiliar face was danger. So when she spotted Marcus kneeling near the mailbox, sketching in his science notebook, holding up a small stone to examine it through his telescope, Margaret didn't see innocence. She saw a criminal scouting targets. Without a second thought, she stormed outside, her sandals slapping the pavement, voice cutting through the warm California air. "Hey, what do you think you're doing out here?" Marcus startled, spinning round, his small hands tightening around the telescope. I found this cool rock," he said softly, his voice shaking but polite. "It looks like a meteorite." He held up the tiny quartz, proud of his discovery. But Margaret's face hardened instantly. She yanked the stone from his palm and snapped. "You don't belong here. Where are your parents?" Her tone was sharp, dripping with accusation. Marcus hesitated, nervous under her glare. "My mom's, she's home," he stammered, accidentally giving the wrong house number. 321 instead of 312. Margaret's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, so you don't even know where you live?" she spat, pulling out her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police." With one hand on her hip and the other holding her phone like a weapon, she hit record and dialed 911. "Yes," she said loudly, her voice deliberate, knowing Marcus could hear every word. "I'm reporting a suspicious black juvenile. He's tampering with mailboxes, using some strange device, and possibly destroying property." Marcus's chest tightened as the words sank in. He wasn't destroying anything. He wasn't even near anyone's mail. But her voice made him guilty before he could explain. On the other end, Susan Clark, the 911 dispatcher, recognized the address instantly, close to Chief Sarah Johnson's home. Susan tried to reach Sarah, but her phone was silenced during a critical city council meeting on police reform. Meanwhile, Margaret paced the sidewalk, her camera trained on Marcus, narrating her twisted version of events. "This is what we have to deal with now," she declared. "Kids casing houses, pretending to play, and no parents anywhere. Disgraceful." Marcus clutched his telescope tighter, his knuckles white, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything," he whispered. But Margaret sneered. "Don't act innocent. People like you don't just look at rocks." The words pierced deeper and she knew. Tears blurred Marcus's vision as his hands shook. Then, without warning, the telescope slipped from his grip and crashed onto the pavement with a sharp, echoing crack. The glass lens shattered, scattering pieces across the sidewalk like broken stars. Marcus gasped, dropping to his knees, scooping up the fragments with shaking fingers. That telescope wasn't just an object. It was his father's memory, his connection to the nights they spent tracing constellations together. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see the stars." But Margaret didn't stop. She stepped closer, her phone inches from his tear-streaked face, her voice colder than ever. "Stop pretending," she hissed. "You people think we're stupid. But I see what you're doing." Across the street, Mr. Rodriguez, an elderly neighbor who'd lived in Riverside Estates for 40 years, opened his door and stepped outside. His voice, though calm, carried authority. "Margaret," he said firmly, "he's just a child. Leave him alone." But Margaret spun on him, pointing sharply toward Marcus. "You don't get it, Eduardo. First, they scout the area, then the break-ins start. Haven't you seen the news?" A few houses down, Mrs. Chen, a single mother of two, rushed out and knelt beside Marcus, gently putting a protective hand on his shoulder. "Margaret, stop this," she said firmly. "I've seen this boy. He walks to school every morning with his little telescope. He's not hurting anyone." But Margaret ignored her, keeping the camera rolling, determined to make Marcus look guilty. Behind them, blinds shifted. More neighbors gathered, whispering to one another, unsure of what to believe. Some stood frozen, siding silently with Margaret out of fear. Others looked horrified, watching a little boy's innocence dissolve before their eyes. Marcus's small hands fumbled with his smartwatch, trying desperately to call his mom, but his fingers trembled so violently that he kept missing the button. "Mom, please," he whispered, chest heaving, voice so faint it barely carried it over the growing tension. In that moment, Riverside Drive felt heavier than the summer heat pressing down on it. Margaret's accusations were about to escalate further. Police cars would arrive, neighbors would take sides, and the peaceful facade of Riverside Estates was about to shatter forever. The sun hung low over Riverside Estates as Marcus had been pedaling his small blue bike around the cul-de-sac earlier that afternoon. His backpack bounced lightly against his shoulders, his science notebook tucked safely inside along with tiny quartz stones he'd found during recess. Today had been special, his first meeting with the school's science club, and he couldn't wait to share his discoveries. After saying goodbye to his friend Jake at the corner, Marcus rode past the community mailbox on Riverside Drive, scanning the ground carefully for what he liked to call earthbound stars. Little fragments of glittering rock he imagined had fallen from the night sky. Spotting a small sparkle near the curb, he hopped off his bike, crouched down, and pulled out his silver telescope, carefully adjusting the tiny lens his father had once shown him how to use. He smiled quietly to himself, imagining his dad's voice explaining constellations, planets, and meteors. For Marcus, this was more than just a rock hunt. It was his way of holding on to his father's memory. But from across the street, Margaret Williams's blinds parted sharply, her suspicious eyes locked onto him like a spotlight. Her body tensed instantly, years of personal pain and online paranoia feeding into one single thought: danger. She'd been watching the Johnsons since the day they moved in 3 weeks ago. Something about them. A young black boy, a single mother, a police chief at that, unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. And today she believed she finally had proof. 3 patrol cars turned the corner onto Riverside Drive, their lights flashing red and blue against the pristine white fences and manicured lawns. Officers Martinez, Davis, and Wilson stepped out, their boots crunching on the pavement, hands resting near their belts. Martinez, a 12-year veteran with graying hair and a stern expression, led the way, followed by Davis, calmer but methodical, and Wilson, a nervous rookie scanning the scene like he'd stepped into something far bigger than a simple call. Margaret rushed toward them immediately, her voice loud and urgent. "Officers, thank God you're here," she said, gesturing wildly toward Marcus. "That boy was tampering with mailboxes using some kind of device. I caught him on video. He's hiding because he knows he's guilty." Officer Martinez's eyes shifted to Marcus, curled up behind the hedge, his small hands clutching his broken telescope, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Son," Martinez said, his voice deep but cautious. "Come out from there." Mrs. Chen stepped forward quickly. "He didn't do anything," she said firmly. "She's exaggerating. He was just looking at rocks." Margaret scoffed loudly, holding up her phone like evidence. "I have everything on video," she snapped. "He even lied about his address. He doesn't even live here." Officer Martinez's gaze sharpened. "Is that true, son? Where do you live?" Marcus sniffled hard, his trembling lips struggling to form the words. I live at 3 and 21 Riverside," he stammered again, giving the wrong number for the second time. Margaret seized the moment instantly. "See?" she shouted triumphantly. "He doesn't even know where he lives. He's not from here." Officer Davis, quieter and more measured, crouched down so his eyes were level with Marcus's. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Take a deep breath for me. Can you tell me your mom's name?" Marcus wiped his tears with the back of his hand and whispered, Sarah Johnson." Davis paused, exchanging a quick glance with Wilson, who checked his notepad where the dispatcher's notes were writ. 10. Recognition flickered in Davis's eyes. "Chief Johnson," he muttered under his breath, suddenly uneasy. But Margaret interrupted before he could ask more. "Don't fall for this," she yelled. "This is exactly how they manipulate you. You have to take him in before he disappears." More neighbors began stepping outside now, drawn by the flashing lights and shouting voices. Some folded their arms, siding with Margaret. Others shook their heads, whispering that this had gone too far. It was no longer just about Marcus. It was about what Riverside Estates stood for and whose voices carried the most weight. Then came the first twist. Mrs. Chen lowered her phone and crossed her arms tightly. "You want to talk about lies, Margaret," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Why don't you tell them about Pine Valley?" Margaret froze, her face paling instantly. Murmurs erupted among the neighbors, curious eyes turning toward her. "What happened in Pine Valley?" Officer Martinez asked sharply. Mrs. Chen's voice stayed steady. "Last year, she accused a Latino teenager of breaking into her old neighborhood's clubhouse, called the police, had him handcuffed in front of his parents. Guess what? He was the maintenance worker's son. He was there fixing a leak." Margaret's face flushed deep red, her grip on her phone tightening. "That has nothing to do with this," she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of growing judgment. "It has everything to do with this," Mrs. Chen shot back. "This isn't the first time you've made up stories. You're doing it again, and this time you're traumatizing a child." More gasps came from the neighbors, some shifting uncomfortably, others lowering their phones as uncertainty spread like wildfire. Officer Wilson, still new but observant, spoke softly to Martinez. "Sir, maybe we should verify the details before we assume anything." But Martin, as his eyes stayed fixed on Marcus, who now clutched his broken telescope like a lifeline, his tiny voice whispering again and again, "I didn't do anything." The tension was unbearable. Neighbors divided, phones recording, accusations flying, and Marcus, the smallest person there, stood at the center of it all, caught between fear and disbelief. None of them knew that at that very moment, miles away, Chief Sarah Johnson's phone was buzzing relentlessly on the conference table as Susan Clark tried to reach her. One voicemail had already been sent. Marcus's shaky voice saying, "Mom, a mean lady called the police. I'm scared." Sarah hadn't heard it yet. But when she did, Riverside Drive would never be the same again. Sarah Johnson's black SUV screeched to a halt at the corner of Riverside Drive, tires crunching against the pavement as the flashing red and blue lights reflected off her windshield. She shoved the gear into park and swung the door open before the engine even fully stopped, her heels hitting the pavement with sharp, deliberate steps. The hum of neighbors' whispers quieted instantly, every head turning as she approached. Her uniform wasn't on. Today she was just Sarah, wearing a simple navy blouse and slacks. But her presence carried weight, authority, and power. Chief Sarah Johnson was home, and the air shifted immediately. Marcus spotted her first, the moment his wide, tear-filled eyes met hers. He bolted forward, sobbing, clutching the shattered telescope pieces in his tiny hands. "Mom!" he cried, collapsing into her arms. Sarah crouched instantly, wrapping him close, her hand smoothing over his trembling back. "I'm here, baby," she whispered softly, kissing the top of his head. "I've got you. You're safe now." Her calm tone belied the fire raging beneath the surface. When she stood again, her expression hardened, scanning the scene. 3 patrol cars, dozens of neighbors, a crowd divided by whispers and tension. Her son's name had been on a dispatch report labeled "Suspicious Juvenile." That alone burned Lee, like acid in her chest. She turned to face the officers, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's going on here?" she demanded, locking eyes with Officer Martinez first. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably under her stare. "Chief, we didn't know it was your son," he admitted awkwardly. "We got a call about a juvenile tampering with mailboxes. Ms. Williams here," he gestured toward Margaret, "claimed she had video proof." Sarah's eyes moved slowly, deliberately, until they landed on Margaret Williams, standing rigid in the middle of the street, phone still clutched tightly in her hand. "Is that right?" Sarah asked, her tone low but laced with quiet steel. Margaret's posture stiffened, her chin tilting upward defensively. "I was protecting my neighborhood," she snapped. "I saw him acting suspicious, kneeling near the mailboxes with some kind of device. I called 911 like any responsible person would." Sarah stepped closer, her voice firm but icy. "That device was a telescope," she said flatly, gesturing toward the cracked silver cylinder clutched in Marcus's hand. "My son was looking at rocks for his science project." Margaret's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out at first. Her grip on her phone faltered, her confidence cracking under the weight of Sarah's unwavering stare. Still, she recovered quickly, her voice growing sharper. "How was I supposed to know that?" she countered. "I saw him crouched near the mailboxes acting suspicious, giving the wrong address. Anyone would have thought the same thing." Sarah's jaw tightened as she drew herself up to her full height, her voice carrying now across the silent street. "No, Margaret," she said evenly. "Not anyone. You thought that because you didn't see a child. You saw a threat." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their phones, shame settling into their expression. Others glanced at Margaret, whispers spreading like wildfire behind cupped hands. Margaret's cheeks flushed deep red, but she refused to back down. "Don't turn this around on me," she snapped. "I've lived here for 10 years and I've seen what happens when you ignore red flags. I wasn't going to let something happen on my watch." Sarah's gaze hardened, her voice dropping an octave, deep and steady. "You mean like the time my late husband refused to represent your ex-husband in court?" The words sliced through the air like a blade. Gasps erupted among the neighbors. Margaret's composure faltered completely, her jaw tightening, her knuckles white around her phone. "This isn't about that," she stammered, her voice suddenly quieter, thinner. "Oh, but it is," Sarah said firmly, stepping closer now, her presence unyielding. "This isn't the first time you've let your personal grudges blind you. Today, you didn't just humiliate my son. You traumatized him, and you called the police on an 8-year-old boy over a rock." Margaret's breathing quickened, her defiance fading under the crushing weight of the truth unraveling before the entire neighborhood. Around them, neighbors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath. A few even stepped closer to Sarah and Marcus, standing silently at their side. Officer Davis finally spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "Chief, with respect, it's clear now Marcus wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, glancing at Margaret meaningfully. Rookie Officer Wilson nodded quickly in agreement, his nervousness obvious. "Ma'am, we shouldn't have questioned him like that without more information," he admitted softly, guilt flickering in his expression. Sarah inhaled deeply, steadying herself before turning back to Marcus, brushing the tears from his cheeks with her thumb. "You're okay now," she murmured softly, her voice dropping to the tender register only a mother's could reach. "You didn't do anything wrong? You hear me? Nothing." Marcus nodded faintly, clinging to her arm, his breathing finally slowing as he buried his face against her blouse. But Sarah wasn't finished. She turned sharply back to Margaret, her voice ringing out, steady and resolute. "This ends today," she declared. "You don't get to weaponize fear. You don't get to shame a child for existing in his own neighborhood. And you certainly don't get to drag my son's name through the mud without consequence." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but faltered, her bravado crumbling under the weight of dozens of eyes fixed on her. For the first time since the confrontation began, her phone lowered to her side. She shifted her weight uncomfortably, her shoulders hunched as murmurs rippled louder through the crowd. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she muttered weakly, her tone almost defensive, almost regretful. But Sarah's voice remained unrelenting. "You called the police on an 8-year-old boy, Margaret," she said evenly. "You made him believe for even a second that he was in danger for simply being who he is. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Silence swept over Riverside Drive like a heavy blanket. Even the flashing lights of the patrol cars seemed muted in that moment. The officers stood quietly, heads slightly bowed, and the neighbors who had gathered closer looked away, ashamed. Marcus, still holding the broken telescope in his small hands, sniffled softly against his mother's side. Finally, Officer Martinez cleared his throat, his voice subdued, his usual authority gone. "Chief, we'll file a full incident report," he said quietly. "No charges, of course, and I'll personally ensure this doesn't happen again." Sarah nodded once, curtly, her attention fixed entirely on Marcus now, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. She bent down to meet his eye level, her voice soft and warm. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're going home." Marcus looked up at her, his lips quivering as he nodded slowly, gripping the shattered telescope tightly in his little fist. Behind them, Margaret stood motionless, her gaze darting nervously from neighbor to neighbor, realizing for the first time just how deeply the ground beneath her had shifted. She wasn't the voice of authority anymore. The street remained quiet as Sarah led Marcus toward their home, her arm draped protectively around his shoulders. The neighbors watched in silence, the reality settling over them like fog. What had happened wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning, and Riverside Drive would never look the same again.